Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, it's one of the most unsettling medical mysteries I think I've ever come across.
It really is something else.
Yeah, imagine this. Just a normal ER visit, seems routine, maybe serious, but then it just spirals. Completely out of control.
Chaos.
Total chaos. Dozens of hospital staff suddenly get sick, one woman dies, and nobody can figure out why. We're talking about Gloria Ramirez.
The toxic lady, as the media unfortunately called her.
Right, the toxic woman. Okay, so let's unpack this. It honestly sounds like a plot from a TV show, like Grey's Anatomy or something.
But it's real.
Yes.
Frighteningly real.
Absolutely. So our mission here today is to really try and understand what went down that night back in 1994. We'll look at the different theories, what people thought happened.
And why it still fascinates people, right? It challenges our understanding of, well, a lot of things. Medical events, chemicals.
Exactly. We're going to dig into the sources, pull out the key pieces of info, the insights, so you can really get a handle on this truly bizarre event.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the night was February 19th, 1994. Gloria Ramirez arrives at Riverside General Hospital, ER. It's about 8:15 p.m.
And she's in bad shape. She has late-stage cervical cancer, which is already serious.
Yeah, symptoms were severe heart palpitations, she was confused, tachycardia, that's a really fast heart rate.
And Sheen-Stokes respiration. That's a very specific abnormal breathing pattern you see in really critical patients. Breathing gets faster, slower, sometimes stops briefly.
Right. Her boyfriend, Johnny Estrada, he'd apparently said she was nauseous, vomiting earlier that day, so clearly very ill even before arriving.
Definitely. And the staff jumped right in. They gave her meds, diazepam, midazolam, lorazepam, trying to calm things down, sedate her.
Then lidocaine and beryllium for the heart rhythm. Standard procedure for the symptoms, I suppose.
Yeah, trying to stabilize that heart. But right away, something felt off to one of the respiratory therapists, Maureen Welch.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
She apparently noted that Ramirez's age, well, it seemed young for symptoms that severe, even with the cancer. They seemed more like something you'd see in a much older person. A little flag went up, you know.
Interesting. And things got really weird.
Yeah, this is where it takes a turn. They're trying to defibrillate her, she's going into shock, and staff start noticing this oily sheen on her body.
An oily sheen. Okay, that's unusual.
Very. And some people notice the smell too. Fruity, kind of garlic-like, coming from her mouth.
Fruity and garlicky. That doesn't sound like anything normal in an ER.
Not at all. So a nurse, Susan Kane, draws blood from her arm. Standard procedure.
Right.
But as she handles the tube, she smells this ammonia-like odor coming from it. Strong smell.
From the blood tube.
Yeah. She passes the tube to a medical resident, Julie Gorshinsky. And Gorshinsky looks closely and sees, well, something else bizarre.
What is?
These little particles floating in the blood. She described them as manila-colored, kind of yellow-brown crystals.
Crystals in the blood. Okay, now we're really off the map.
Completely.
Yeah.
And then, almost immediately, things start happening to the staff.
This is the collapse part, right?
Exactly. Susan Kane, the nurse who drew the blood and smelled the ammonia, she suddenly feels this burning sensation on her face, and then she just faints. Collapses.
Whoa.
They had to carry her out. Then Julie Gorshinsky, the resident who saw the crystals. She feels nauseous, dizzy, lightheaded, and then she faints too.
Oh my God.
And her case was serious. She ended up spending 2 weeks in intensive care, breathing problems, later developed hepatitis, and a vascular necrosis in her knees.
A vascular necrosis, that's where bone tissue dies, right? Lack of blood supply.
Precisely. It's a severe, often permanent condition. So very real physical consequences for her.
Unbelievable. Was that it? Just the two of them?
No, Maureen Welch, the respiratory therapist who noted the age thing earlier, she also reported smelling the ammonia odor, and then she fainted. When she came to, she apparently couldn't control her arms and legs properly for a while.
This is terrifying. 3 staff down, just like that.
The whole ER was in chaos. They ordered an evacuation patient sent out to the parking lot, declared an internal emergency.
Because they cleared the area.
Mostly. A skeleton crew stayed behind, still trying to save Ramirez.
Yeah.
But despite, 45 minutes of CPR, defibrillation attempts.
It wasn't enough.
No. Gloria Ramirez was pronounced dead at 8:50 p.m. The official cause listed later was kidney failure, related to her cancer.
But the immediate aftermath, the scene she left behind,
was baffling. In total, 23 people who were near Ramirez reported feeling ill. 5 of them ended up hospitalized.
23 people.
Yeah, and because no one knew what was going on, her body was handled with extreme caution. isolated, put in special bags, eventually moved to an airtight container.
Just incredible. So the big question hanging over everything,
Yeah.
what on earth happened?
Exactly. And that kicked off a major investigation. Riverside County Health Department got involved, called in the state California's Department of Health and Human Services. 2 doctors, Anna Maria Osorio and Kirsten Waller, they led the initial inquiry. Interviewed 34 hospital staff members who were there that night.
What did they find?
Well, it's interesting how quickly one particular theory gained traction. They noticed a pattern.
Yeah.
The people with the worst symptoms, fainting, shortness of breath, muscle spasms, they tended to be the ones who worked closest to Ramirez, like within 2 feet, or handled her 5G lines. That seemed significant.
Okay, so just proximity mattered. Direct contact or close exposure.
Right. But they also found other correlations that were, well, maybe less clear. Symptoms seemed more common in women than men.
Why would that be?
Good question. And maybe the biggest thing for this initial theory, blood tests done on all the affected staff afterwards. They came back normal. No toxins detected.
No toxins, even in Gorczynski with the long-term effects.
Apparently not in those initial post-exposure tests.
Yeah.
So putting that together, the proximity, the gender difference of the normal blood tests Osorio and Waller leaned towards. Mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria, like a psychological contagion.
Essentially, yeah. Mass sociogenic illness is the technical term. They noted 27 out of 37 staff members reported some kind of symptom, which is a high number, possibly suggesting a psychological component triggered by this stressful, weird event.
But, I mean, fainting, muscle spasms, a vascular necrosis, that sounds way beyond just thinking you're sick because others are.
And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? That was the immediate pushback, especially from people like Julie Gorczynski. Her physical injuries were severe and long-lasting. It felt, well, inadequate. Dismissive, maybe.
Yeah, it seems hard to square mass hysteria with actual bone death. It really shows the difficulty when faced with something completely unexplained.
Absolutely. That tension, the inadequacy of the hysteria explanation for the severe physical cases, meant they had to dig deeper.
So where did they go next?
The Riverside Coroner's Office contacted Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This is a major federal research facility, lots of high-level scientific expertise.
Okay, bringing in the big guns.
Right. And Livermore came up with a very different kind of theory, a chemical theory. It's become known as the DMSO hypothesis.
DMSO? What's that?
Dimethyl sulfoxide. Yeah, it's an industrial solvent, like a degreaser. But it's also been used sort of off-label or as a home remedy for pain relief. People rub it on their skin.
A home remedy. So Livermore thought Ramirez might have been using this DMSO stuff herself.
That was their starting point. They speculated she might have been using it to manage pain from her cancer. Users often report a garlic-like taste or smell.
Ah, the fruity, garlicky odor the staff noticed.
Exactly. And applying it topically, rubbing it on, could maybe explain that oily sheen on her skin.
Okay, so those 2 weird observations suddenly have a potential chemical link.
Potentially, yeah. But that's just the start of their theory. It gets more complex.
How so?
They figured because her kidneys were failing due to the cancer, she wasn't filtering her blood properly. So this DMSO, if she was using it, could have built up in her system to unusually high levels.
Right, makes sense. Kidneys not working, stuff accumulates.
Then factor in the paramedics giving her oxygen through a mask. Livermore theorized that this extra oxygen could have chemically reacted with the DMSO in her body, converting it into something else. Dimethyl sulfone, or DMSO2.
Okay, a chemical reaction triggered by the oxygen. What's DMSO2?
Well, the key property here is that DMSO2 is known to crystallize at room temperature.
Crystallize. Like the crystals Gorczynski saw in the blood sample.
That was the proposed explanation. The oxygen turns DMSO into DMSO2, and DMSO2 forms crystals when it cools slightly, like when the blood was drawn into the cooler air of the ER.
Wow, okay. That connects the smell, the sheen, and the crystals. It's intricate, but it hangs together so far.
It does attempt to link those specific, bizarre observations. But there's one more step in their hypothesis, and it's the most crucial and maybe the most controversial part.
What's that?
They needed to explain why the staff got sick. DMSO and DMSO2 aren't generally considered acutely toxic in the way the staff reacted, so they proposed another conversion.
Another one? Triggered by what?
The defibrillation. The electric shocks delivered to her body. Livermore suggested these shocks could have provided the energy needed to convert the DMSO2 into dimethyl sulfate, DMS, sometimes called DMSO4.
Dimethyl sulfate, is that bad?
Oh yeah. DMS is highly toxic. It's a potent alkylating agent known to be carcinogenic. Exposure can cause exactly the kinds of symptoms the staff reported: fainting, burning sensations, respiratory distress. It's nasty stuff.
So the theory is DMSO buildup due to kidney failure. Oxygen converts it to DMSO2 crystals. Defibrillation converts that to toxic DMS staph exposed to DMS fumes or contact illness.
That's the chain of events Livermore proposed. They even suggested the temperature drop when the blood was drawn might have helped facilitate one of the conversions, maybe the crystallization.
That is a remarkably specific chemical cascade happening inside a person, triggered by standard medical procedures. How plausible is that, really? Did scientists buy it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. It's a neat theory because it explains so many weird details. But many organic chemists were, and still are, pretty skeptical. They argue that those kinds of chemical conversions usually take specific conditions, maybe more time, higher temperatures than you'd find in the human body, even during defibrillation. The idea that DMS could form that rapidly under those conditions, it seemed like a stretch to some experts.
So a scientifically elegant theory, but maybe chemically improbable in a living or recently deceased body.
That's the debate, yeah.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for the official conclusion after this massive investigation involving like 10 different agencies?
Yeah, what did they finally land on?
It was nuanced and maybe a bit unsatisfying for people wanting a single definitive answer. The final report suggested it was likely an outbreak of mass sociogenic illness, mass hysteria, potentially triggered by the chemical conversion pathway Livermore described.
So, a bit of both. They couldn't rule out the chemical reaction, but thought the scale of the illness pointed more towards psychology.
Kind of, yeah. They acknowledged the possibility of an initial chemical exposure, maybe from the smell or the blood, causing some initial symptoms in the closest staff. But they seemed to feel the widespread nature, affecting 23 people, along with those normal blood tests and the gender correlation, pointed more strongly towards a sociogenic component layered on top. It was like the weird chemical smell might have been the trigger for the hysteria in many.
So even the experts ended up with ambiguity. They couldn't definitively say, yes, the DMSO conversion happened and caused everything, but they couldn't rule it out either.
Pretty much. It was the best fit they could find for a truly baffling set of facts.
And the story doesn't even end there, does it? The aftermath with her body and the family.
No, it gets even more complicated and, frankly, sad.
Mm-hmm.
It took 2 months after her death for Gloria Ramirez's body to be released for burial.
2 months? Why so long?
Well, the investigation was ongoing. When she was finally released, the Riverside Coroner's Office officially endorsed the Livermore DMSO theory as the likely explanation for the staff's illness.
But the family didn't accept that.
Not at all. They were very unhappy with the whole situation. Her sister, Maggie Ramirez Garcia, publicly questioned why it took 10 weeks to determine the cause of death was natural causes related to her cancer. She argued Gloria wouldn't have died that specific night if she hadn't gone to that hospital.
And the family arranged their own autopsy, right?
They did. And the findings from that independent autopsy were disturbing.
What did they find?
According to reports, they found some of her organs were cross-contaminated with fecal matter. Her body was apparently quite decomposed, maybe more than expected even after 10 weeks, although that's subjective.
Okay.
And perhaps most significantly, her heart was missing. And so was that original vial of blood drawn just before she died, the one with the supposed crystals.
Missing. The heart and the blood vial. Why would they be missing?
That's never been clearly explained. The coroner's office might have retained them for ongoing tests, which can happen, but the lack of clear communication and the family's existing distrust, it just fueled their suspicions and grief. They felt something was being covered up, or at least mishandled badly.
You can absolutely see why they'd feel that way. Missing organs, contamination. It sounds awful.
It does. So Gloria Ramirez was finally buried on April 20th, 1994. Her official cause of death remained cardiac dysrhythmia, leading to kidney failure due to her cancer. But her family continued to blame the hospital environment and the handling of the situation.
What a tragic layer on top of an already bizarre medical mystery.
Absolutely. Yet, despite the family's doubts and the chemist's skepticism, that Livermore DMSO explanation has found some purchase in the scientific world.
Really? How so?
Patrick Grant, the Livermore scientist behind the theory, published his findings. They were peer-reviewed. And the explanation has actually appeared in some forensic science textbooks.
In textbooks?
Yeah. For example, one called Fundamentals of Forensic Science basically says, look, this specific chemical conversion hadn't really been seen before, but it's still considered the most scientific explanation to date. They add that beyond this theory, no credible explanation has ever been offered.
So, in the absence of anything better, it's kind of the default scientific hypothesis, even with the question marks.
That seems to be the status. It holds a certain weight because it does attempt to explain the specific weirdness of the case using chemistry, even if the chemistry itself is debated.
And of course, a story this strange was bound to capture public attention, right? It popped up in pop culture.
Oh yeah, definitely. BuzzFeed Unsolved did an episode, obviously, called The Bizarre Toxic Death of Gloria Ramirez.
Yeah.
Very popular.
I think I saw that one.
There was a Canadian show, Murdoch Mysteries, a historical detective show. They did an episode called A Most Surprising Bond that directly used the DMSO hypothesis as a plot point.
Huh.
The famous anime director Katsuhiro Otomo's anthology film Memories has a segment called Stink Bomb about a guy who accidentally takes a pill that makes him emit lethal gas. Clearly inspired by this kind of scenario.
Wow. And didn't Grey's Anatomy do something similar?
They did. Season 3 episode called Wishin' and Hopin'. A patient takes some kind of herbal supplement that makes her blood toxic, causing doctors nearby to faint. Very clearly referencing the Ramirez case.
It really taps into that fear of the unknown within a supposedly safe medical environment.
Totally. So when you pull it all together, it's just this bizarre, tragic, scientifically confusing case. Gloria Ramirez.
Yeah. It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? Between a psychological explanation like mass hysteria and a complex, maybe improbable chemical one. Where do you land when the evidence is so ambiguous?
And it shows how even in a hospital, a place of science and control, something completely unexpected, something unknown can just emerge. It pushes the boundaries of what we think we understand about medicine, chemistry, even group psychology.
Yeah, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right?
Exactly. And what really lingers, I think, from this whole deep dive is just that sense of unease.
Definitely. You have this peer-reviewed scientific theory from Littlemore, but you also have the missing organs, the missing blood vial, the family's very real pain and unanswered questions. It leaves you feeling unsettled.
It really does.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about this case, with all its strangeness and ambiguity, what does it make you think about how readily we accept official explanations versus how much we question them, especially when we're faced with something truly, deeply bizarre, something to mull over?